Welcome back, everyone, to the Wedge 52 Gridiron Podcast. I'm your host, Wedge. Today's episode will be the 10-minute report Bears. Before we jump in today, please make sure you press that follow button right here on Spotify so you guys can be notified and be ready to see all of the future episodes I drop here on the Wedge 52 Gridiron Podcast, as well as check out some of the past episodes. I've been dropping a 10-minute report every single day for the month of July. If you guys are unfamiliar, the 10-minute report series is where I take 20 minutes of study plus my already established knowledge to create a 10-minute podcast. With that being said, let's jump into today's episode, the 10-minute report on the Chicago Bears. Starting off with their quarterback, Justin Fields. Last year, Fields had 2,200 passing yards to go along with 17 touchdowns and 11 interceptions. All of that was on a 60.4% completion percentage. These numbers are definitely not staggering. 27 or 17 and 11 touchdown interception ratio. Obviously not what you're looking for at that 1.5 mark. And then as well as the 2,200 passing yards is nothing crazy. And definitely the Bears are going to be needing some improvement for his passing yards in terms of that. But he does get a little bit of a break because of his dual threat abilities, where last year he also had 1,143 yards on the ground to go along with 8 rushing touchdowns. So if you look at it in total picture, 3,300 yards, 25 touchdowns, 11 interceptions. Those numbers are looking much better. If he could improve his touchdown to interception ratio and try and get that over the 2 touchdowns to 1 interception mark, as well as increase his passing yards by 800-ish yards, that would be the ideal range for on the low side for a dual threat quarterback if he can maintain the rushing numbers. The Bears last season, however, were still 3-12, had the worst record in the NFL. Justin Fields was sacked a league-leading 55 times last year, which definitely doesn't help his ability to find open receivers and advance the ball downfield via the air. Some of that, is in part to their offensive line, who last year was okay. Obviously, they struggled on the passing side, but the rushing attack, their rush blocking, was average. But they definitely are looking at hopefully an improved line for their sake this offseason, and leading into the 2023 season. This offseason, they signed guard Nate Davis, who played for the Titans. Last year, Davis allowed 3 sacks and 4 penalties, which is very good numbers. He will definitely be a starter for them right away. And then they also drafted Tennessee tackle Darnell Wright in the first round of the NFL draft. Last year at Tennessee, he had, let's run it back a few years first, actually. In 2020, Darnell Wright allowed 5 sacks. In 2021, he allowed 3 sacks. And in 2022, he allowed 0 sacks. And then his last 19 games of his career, so 13, I believe, last season, as well as 6 in 2021, he allowed 0 sacks. So the improvement from Darnell Wright over his 3 years in college were very good improvements, impeccable in terms of sacks allowed. So the Bears are definitely hopeful for Darnell Wright to be an instant starter at the tackle spot, and hopefully, for the Bears' sake, turn into kind of a cornerstone offensive lineman for their franchise. And then they also signed, they already had Whitehair and Jenkins, who last year had decent seasons, respectively. Whitehair gave up 4 sacks and had no penalties. And then Jenkins gave up 2 sacks and 3 penalties. So those two are already pretty decent. And then adding Wright and Davis should hopefully boost their offensive line for the Bears to be around the middle of the pack, potentially even a couple positions above that. So that's definitely going to help the Bears offense. In terms of the backfield, they have running back Khalil Herbert, who's now going to be it's actually I'm not so sure who's going to be the number one role between Herbert and free agent signing D'Onta Foreman. But last year Herbert had 731 yards to go along with 4 touchdowns. And then they also signed running back D'Onta Foreman, who played last year for the Carolina Panthers. And he had 914 yards and 5 touchdowns. So between the two of them, they're looking to get some good production to replace David Montgomery, who, of course, left during free agency. At the wide receiver position, they have newly acquired DJ Moore, who they acquired during the blockbuster trade with the Carolina Panthers. They traded away that number 1 pick, as well as they traded away the pick, got DJ Moore, as well as the first-round pick this year that they used on Darnell Wright, as well as future compensation, like I believe a first-rounder in 2024. DJ Moore last year with the Panthers had 888 yards and 7 touchdowns. That was a down year for him in terms of yards, about 300 or 400 under where he's been the past couple of seasons, but a career high in touchdowns. And he's been doing that with all below average quarterbacks. So it'll be interesting to see if DJ Moore is in fact the real deal with a quarterback like Justin Fields, who is probably better than any quarterback DJ Moore has played with so far. They also have Chase Claypool, who they acquired midseason last year from the Steelers, who had 451 yards and 1 touchdown last year. And then Darnell Mooney, who kind of had a down year, but last year he had 493 yards and 2 touchdowns. But in 2021, Mooney had himself over 1,000 yards and 4 touchdowns. They also just signed Cole Kmet to a 4-year, $50 million extension, and he had 544 yards and 7 touchdowns last season. The defense is a big problem for the Chicago Bears, especially I think they're definitely going to struggle with that again. They've made some efforts at improvement. They've definitely made some improvement in the linebacker room, but just even being in their own division with the potent offensive weapons that the Vikings and Lions have, that's 4 opponents alone that you're going to struggle with. And then they also play the Chiefs this year, so their defense is going to struggle once again, but should be better than last year, which isn't hard to do when last season they were 32nd in points per game allowed, 29th in yards per game allowed, 32nd in third down percentage allowed, and 32nd in opponent touchdowns per game. One of their acquisitions was signing linebacker Tremaine Edwards, who played for Buffalo. Edwards has been a stud since he's entered the league. They signed him to a 4-year, $72 million deal. Last year, Edwards had 102 tackles, 6 tackles for a loss, 7 passes defense, and then a sack and an interception for the Bills. Definitely a solid pickup there. He will be a starting linebacker, as well as they signed another guy who will probably be a starting linebacker. Had a great year last year with the Eagles in TJ Edwards, who had 159 tackles, 10 tackles for a loss, 7 passes defense, and 2 sacks. So those are their, I would project their 2 starting linebackers for this season. The only other 2 bright pieces, I would say, from their defense last year, and that are still going to be there this year, is Kyler Gordon. He was a rookie cornerback last year who had himself a pretty solid season with 71 tackles, 3 interceptions, and 6 passes defense. And then safety, Eddie Jackson had 80 tackles, 4 interceptions, and 6 passes defense. So the linebackers are definitely looking solid with their free agent signings that they made. The secondary has a couple of great, solid players. But where they really struggled last year was the front seven, which obviously they addressed with the 2 Edwards that they signed. But then defensive line and edge, pass rush, outside linebacker, that position group or whatever, they really struggled. Didn't sign or draft any huge name players, in my opinion, but they did make an effort between free agent signings and draft picks. They used 6 of them on defensive line and edge rusher. So that's all I have for the 10-minute report on the Bears, which leaves me with just one thing remaining, and that is my 2023 record prediction for the Chicago Bears, where I predict they will go 5-12. Thank you all for listening to this episode, the 10-minute report Bears. Please make sure you check out some other episodes here on the Wedge 52 Gridiron, as well as tap that follow button on Spotify and Instagram at the same username. Thanks again, and go Ravens.